Good morning, everyone. This is Tim Gleisner, Head of Collections at the Library of Michigan, here today with author David Miles, author of Boulders. David, how are you today?
Good, Tim. How's yourself?
I'm doing fine. Fantastic. How are things up in Charlevoix today?
Well, it's a beautiful day in Charlevoix. It has been for the last several days, which was fortunate because we just had the Bay Thunder event, which brought about several thousand people into town to watch the power boats coming
Oh,
up Lake Charlevoix and then going out into Lake Michigan. It's quite a spectacle. I'm sorry you weren't
fantastic.
here to see it.
Fantastic. Yeah, unfortunately, it's raining down here today. I just talked to another northern Michigan author today, and they basically were having sunshine and beautiful days, and down here it's raining in Lansing. But it's good to see you today. And David, I'm wondering if we could just start out with just a little bit about yourself, your background, and really what got you to write this book.
Well, a little bit of background. I was born and raised in Charlevoix and went to the University of Michigan. Started out in architecture, ironically, because I just wrote about uh, an architect, even though he never called himself that. But I switched over to English and got both my bachelor's and my master's degree in English in 1963.
Okay.
And then just events followed up that I ended up back in Charlevoix in 1971, and I've been here ever since. And I started working for the Historical Society, the Charlevoix Historical Society, in 1997.
Hmm.
And my father had done his own history of Charlevoix that came out in 1976 in time for the bicentennial. And it just sort of worked its way from there. My mother took over his seat on the board of directors at the Historical Society when he passed away in 86, and then she passed in 97. And they asked me to fill her seat, and one thing led to another. And I ended up writing my own book on Charlevoix's history based upon my father's work, complementary to, in 2002. And I have been writing for the Society ever since, and have since done 2 DVDs, documentaries, and Boulders is my 10th book.
Fantastic. So give us an idea of all your books. I mean, like what on Charlevoix have you written about previously?
Other than the big general book that came out in 2002, which was 471 pages long,
Wow.
and it almost killed me, figuratively speaking, because
Rightly so.
I had no idea
Rightly so.
what I was doing with my first endeavor. But then I went on to do with three others, and we put out books on Charlevoix's hotels, the railroads, the piers in the channel, the maritime history, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then it culminated, Boulders then being my second biggest book, and that is 171 pages.
Okay, so I got to ask just a personal background about you. So previous to the Historical Society, what were you doing up in Charlevoix for those years until you got on the board over at the society?
Well, it's a long story. I finally got sick of my working in Ann Arbor, and I took off for Europe for 14 and a half months. And I
Nice.
thought this would make a great book. So I came back and started writing. Of course, it never happened. But I supported myself by working as a night manager at the local hotel in Charlevoix that was built by Earl Young called the Lodge. And it is now the very beautiful transformed Hotel Earl named after the architect.
Nice. Okay. So,
So it was working nights there was good because when I started on Bob Miles Charlevoix 2, the big one I did, the first one, I had about 3 hours every night that I worked during the week to do a lot of research and writing. So everything sort of fit together
nice.
to culminate in what I've been doing.
So what do you do at the society right now? What is your current position?
I was a director here for a while, but as the time went by, we needed somebody full time. And the fellow you just worked with to set this program up, Trevor, is now the manager of operations here, and
Okay.
I am now a curator.
Ah,
Better, better title than director because I really didn't direct anything.
okay. All right.
Curator more or less fills the bill.
Okay. So, obviously I sent you a list of questions, and the one question I always ask everybody is why do you write? And so, yeah, why do you write? And for those of us, I've been to Charlevoix a few times, but I'm sure many of our viewers, some of them haven't. I mean, I'm sure many have. But why do you write? And what is it about Charlevoix that you find so compelling as a story?
When I started here in 1997, the fact that my father had been on the board of directors and had published, well, actually, the society published his work. He didn't do it himself. But I don't know if there was anything edible going on here or not, but I really had no interest in Charlevoix's history. But when I started on the board of directors in 1997, the then director, Betsy Reynolds, who was the mother of Jeff Reynolds, who of course you know,
I do know Jeff Reynolds, yes.
was director here, and she asked me if I had any spare time to start cleaning up the files, putting them in order, etc. Because Betsy was a teacher and she didn't have that much time to devote to the place.
Right.
So things were backing up on her. So I said I had about 2 days a week that I could devote to it. And I started reading Tim, and it was like getting whacked over the head with a 2x4. I had no idea that Charlevoix has the history that it does. It
Wow.
just simply doesn't quit. And I got addicted. And then I kept telling the members of the board of directors and people would come in, there's great things I was finding in the files about Charlevoix. And in 1998, one of the members of the board, Mike Burgeon, came to me and said, we've been talking about what you've been saying, and we think that we need another updated version of your father's work. Would you like to give it a try? Well, I had written a few term papers in college. What's the big deal? So I said yes, little knowing what I was getting in for. And 3.5 years later, out it came, and it sold 2,700 copies. We're very proud of it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we think it's reached the end of its shelf life, and we only get a few inquiries every year to do it again. To make any kind of a profit on a book like that, you have to buy at least 500 copies.
Sure.
It would take forever just to recoup the investment.
And how many pages was that history?
So we did a very smaller version of 200 photographs, a little potted version of Charlevoix, and that's what took its place. So that's how I got started. So it wasn't my idea to get started writing.
Right,
But
right.
once I get into the groove of it, and putting up exhibits and doing programs and writing these books, it just came naturally to me. And I can sit down. I do not have writer's block. I have the opposite problem. I
Too
write
much.
too much.
Oh, okay.
So I have a loyal core of editors who have been with me since book one up through now, and I trust them implicitly to
Well,
keep
Dave,
me on the straight and narrow.
this is
So we have a
fantastic. So
very good working
you
relationship.
have a loyal group of editors. So I mean, I've known many local historians. Like you said, Jeff Reynolds, he's the archivist down at the Joint Archives in Holland, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
So he and I, we know a lot of local historians, and I know how they can get. So you have these loyal editors. Uh, how do they keep you on focus? How do you keep yourself on focus when I mean, because you probably have all these files that have been accumulated for years and years, I'm thinking. So how do you keep yourself on focus and on topic?
Well, after we do the research, I should say, and I start assembling everything.
Yeah.
For example, I was able to do Earl Young through the phases of his career. There were 4 of them. So I will write a first draft of what we need. And then we will sit down once a week and we will go over it after they've had a chance to read it. And line by line, word by word, we will go through and see what needs to be changed.
Nice.
And even though we do sometimes come up against loggerheads of somebody's arguing this way, somebody's arguing that way, we keep the number of the people on the editorial board at an odd number, so majority rules. And that's worked beautifully. And a lot of times I don't agree with them, they don't agree with me, but after time goes on, I can see that they were right in maybe 95% of the cases. So powered by a lot of dark chocolate, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us, 4 of us, and then 5. In the beginning, up with 7, a group of 7. When we were ending, we had a final editor and then somebody who chimed in from Mesa, California, Mesa, Arizona, I'm sorry. And she is our, what would I call it? Your Earl Young maven. She has read everything we have about him, and she helps with the step-on bus tours we do of mushroom houses.
Fantastic. So David, let me ask you this. You mentioned the fact that, you went into this position and you started reading and suddenly, a 2x4 hit you in the head. So let me ask you, what was it about Charlevoix and its history? You're a native of Charlevoix. You didn't pay much attention to it in your younger years, but what was that 2x4 that hit you? And we'll get into Earl Young too, but I'm just interested, for our viewers, because I'll be honest with you, I grew up in the Great Lakes. I've been in the Great Lakes all my life. And like you in your younger years, I mean, I always, to be frank, never really cared much about the history at all, but later on realized I lived in a pretty interesting place. So what was it about Charlevoix that was that 2x4 metaphorically that just smacked you?
I never realized how important Charlevoix was, not only to the immediate area, to itself, to Michigan, to the Midwest, but Charlevoix is known literally around the world.
Okay.
Last year, we keep a guest register here at the museum, and we had people arriving from 37 different states and 8 foreign countries. They have been coming, well, we just had somebody from Mexico last week, and Siberia, Argentina, Japan, China, Egypt. The appeal of this town has reached out. And not only that, but in 1897, the local paper, the Sentinel, reported that there was more maritime tonnage going through the waters of Charlevoix than any other port on the east side of Lake Michigan.
Really?
Yeah. In 1908, Charlevoix was the largest fish exporting point on the Great Lakes. And the Great Lakes at that time provided 25% of the nation's consumption of fish.
Wow.
The number of famous people who have been here, I did a program recently called Bragging Rights, and we try to keep track of the famous people who have either been here, even if it's only for a day, or even resorted here, and came to find out when I put it up on the screen, I had 21 covers of Time magazine of people who have been in Charlevoix.
Okay.
And for a town of 2,500 people, that is pretty remarkable.
Sure. Yeah.
We had the Big Rock Point nuclear plant here. It was the first one in Michigan, the 5th in the country, and it set world records for operations in its duration.
Okay.
So all of this, and if I'm going to put up an exhibit of what makes Charlevoix Charlevoix, I call it Bragging Rights, but that's not a good title for an exhibit. I have 34 separate categories that I can use.
Okay.
So if you were in Charlevoix in the last 2 weekends, if you were walking downtown, it was elbow to elbow. There are so many people coming here. So and in 1911, I think it was, the Pure Market Railroad, there were 10 newspapers in Chicago at that time. So this was going out to millions of people in the Midwest. Charlevoix, Michigan, the queen of the northern resort country.
Nice. So let me ask you, before you took this position and before you found this out, did you have any idea about any of this about Charlevoix before you started doing this work?
None.
Okay.
None. All I knew, it's been a resort mecca of the Midwest for a long time, but that was the only thing that made any sense to me because of our natural beauty that attracts all these people. It's when I got into the history and found out all this other stuff about our industries, the famous people who have been here, the importance of it economically, really to the entire nation. This is really a keystone up here, because if you look at a picture of Lake Charlevoix, it's in 2 sections like this. South arm and the north arm going to Boyne City. Charlevoix is the funnel through which used to be all of the resources of this part of Michigan went out into the world. Millions and millions of board feet of lumber that went to help the rebuilding of Chicago after the Great Fire. Went out to Charlevoix.
Okay. So let me ask you, So you write these histories of Charlevoix on the different industries or different aspects of Charlevoix, but then you come to this individual of Earl Young. Had you written anything about an individual previous to Earl Young, or was it always just more general works on, the industry or the tourism or the general history of Charlevoix?
No, this is the first biography I ever did. And the way it started was Earl Young became semi-famous in his lifetime. He died in 1975, but it wasn't until after the turn of the century that it started to build, and more people were coming to Charlevoix to see his work. And a lot of questions were being asked. Charlevoix Chamber of Commerce, the local library, Convention and Visitors Bureau, the Historical Society. Who was this man and how did he create? So here's how the book started. It was in 2018 at the October board meeting
Mm-hmm.
of the society. I went and I sat down next to our president, Denise Fate. And we didn't even say hello. She just turned to me and she said, I've been talking to the library, the Chamber of Commerce, etc. And we think it's about time we did a biography of Earl Young because there's so many questions being asked about him. What do you think? And I said, after all I've done, I know how to write a book. I said, sure, let's give it a try. Let's see what happens.
Wow.
So the board of directors approved the finances for the book in December. And in January of 2019, I gathered my editorial crew together and we sat down and we started in. And it took 13 months time span, but 11 months actually working because we had to take the summer off because nobody gets anything done in Charlevoix in the summer. So if you've been up here and if you realize why. Yeah, you can't even turn around, you're so busy. So then we brought in a totally impartial editor named Jan Grupp, and she tightened it up really beautifully. And Mike Barton, the photographer, had the knowledge of how to put the book together. It's entirely self-published. We do not have a middleman. We did it ourselves. And Mike helped us because he had his own knowledge of how to book together because he did his own books all over the country and two in Charlevoix, one on Earl Young and one on Charlevoix itself. So he did the technical work and we sent it out. It was printed in South Korea and we had it in hand last May and put it on sale May 29. And since then, we have gone through the entire first printing and we're into the second right now.
Congratulations. So let me ask you about the process. So you decide on the individual Earl Young because questions are being asked about him, rightly so. So I would guess just from the timeline you gave me earlier in the conversation, might have run across Mr. Young in your younger years. Is that correct? Or did you know?
I knew him, yes. My father was the local photographer, Bob Miles, and he did a lot of photographic work for Earl, and a lot of my dad's work is in the book.
Okay, so what kind of character was Mr. Young? I mean, was he well known about town? I mean, what was his
Yes, he was a very controversial man because he was a very difficult man to work with and to work for.
Okay.
To give you an example, I worked at the local soda fountain, cigar store, newsstand downtown from 1954 to 1959.
Mm-hmm.
And my boss, Joe Williams, had what we called the cubby holes on one wall where we would reserve newspapers for people, especially during the summer. And Earl had a box. And he came in to get his paper. And over that 5 years, I don't remember speaking to him once. He was very taciturn. He could be very charming. Yeah. And I say in the book, he was a mass of contradictions. And a lot of people, he graded them the wrong way. So he didn't have that many friends. He was totally focused on his work, designing, and his real estate business. So you don't want to cast aspersions on anyone, but he just was one of those people who was not a people person.
Sure.
Let's put it that way. But look what he left us. It's incomparable. It's a world treasure.
Yeah, yeah. So tell us what he left us. What did he leave us?
He left us right now, I think it's 26 houses and 3 commercial structures.
Okay.
So he did his designing and building beginning in 1919, which was coincidentally the 100th anniversary year that we started work on the book in 2019.
Okay.
It just happened that way. So he started his designing in 1919 and he finished in 1973.
Wow.
So there was a time in there he didn't build any houses. He concentrated on the 2 motels he built. And then he ended up with 3 houses just 2 years before he died.
So tell us, why is that significant? What was he building for our viewers, people who have not seen the book Boulders? What was it about these houses and these commercial structures that were so significant and really, quite frankly, singular to the Charlevoix area?
When Earl arrived here at 11 years old in 1900, he came from Mansalona, which is
Okay.
only 30 miles from Charlotte, but it's an entirely different topography.
Yeah.
It's flat surrounded by art, not too inspiring hills.
Yep.
And he moved up here and we had pine trees, we had beach, we had water. The young man was just blown away. And he discovered the glacial erratics that had fallen out of the glaciers at the end of the last ice age, scattered all over the place, especially on the lake shores. And he fell madly in love with them. And he knew from boyhood that he wanted to be a builder with stone. So he went to the University of Michigan School of Architecture after he graduated in 1908, lasted 1 year because he didn't agree with anything he was being taught. So he came back here.
Right.
Parents had divorced in 1905, and he came back and lived with his mother, went into the insurance and real estate business with her, but he became entirely self-taught, other than what he learned at the first year at Michigan. He
Hmm.
dove into construction and design books. He apprenticed himself to a stonemason. And then when it came time in his mid-30s to start getting going, he started and he never let up until 2 years before he passed away.
Wow. So
So
he's
it's a remark, and he said he was only relying on anything he found in Mother Nature. He didn't rely on anybody, anything. He didn't rely on any buildings that had been built here. Nothing inspired him except Mother Nature,
wow.
which can be disputed a little bit in some of his commercial structures, but that's basically Earl. And he never drew a blueprint. He never drew an elevation. He never drew a floor plan.
Wow.
He worked out of his head. And this is what Earl would do when he got a new piece of property to build on. He would go down, and it was a ritual on every piece of ground. He would walk around it, sometimes for hours, absorbing its essence through the soles of his feet. One time, his little girls, and he had 3 of them, a couple of them wanted to go with him. And so they did. And they sat and watched as Earl walked around this property. And they said, "Daddy, can we go home now?" He said, "Not right yet, ladies. Not right yet. In a bit, and we'll go." So what he was trying to discover, even with the people who had commissioned a house to go on a piece of property, he could never tell them what he was looking for. And they could never feel it themselves. So that was Earl. It
Well,
was
let me ask
also
you this. Let me ask you this. So he's a self-taught architect. He obviously seems to have a very much, or he had a very much, an artistic temperament from what it sounds like. And let me ask you, how did he convince people to give him commissions? I mean, especially early in the early years. I mean, what was it that he, I mean, what was his pitch? I mean, how did he get people to like believe in his work, especially in his early years back in 1919, 1920, around there?
the first ones that went up in Boulder Park, the first 5 or so between 1925 and 1927,
Uh-huh.
were all built on spec. So people would come up and they would see them. And then other people would come up, talk to the people who had bought them, talk to Earl, "Will you do one for me?" So no 2 houses are alike. Each one has its own idiosyncratic touch.
Yeah.
So if you commissioned a house from Earl Young, you never knew what you were going to get until you got it. He could change horses in midstream, design-wise, because he'd had a dream the night before. And it got to the point where his wife, Irene, would sit him down at the dinner table. She was an artist.
Uh-huh.
She would say, "What are you doing tomorrow?" And he would take scrap paper and a pencil and he would start drawing and talking to himself. And then she would watch and she would listen. And she would go to her drawing board and she would draw up more detailed plans on the sly. We have two of them, unfortunately. One is in the book. And she would then make up a more comprehensive design of what Earl was doing, slip out of the house the next morning before he woke up, and go down to the building site to meet the construction foreman on the sly and hand him her work so they would somewhat have an idea of what he was going to be talking about when he arrived on site.
Okay.
He could drive his workmen nuts because if he didn't like something he'd done, a week later he'd order them to tear it out and start all over.
Really?
So that was Earl. That's what, when I say difficult, I mean difficult.
Well, now, that brings up a good point, because you said he's a taciturn man, or he was a taciturn man, and he basically didn't get along with people so well. How did he keep his clients? I mean, did they just believe in him, blind faith? I mean, he was not an easy guy to get along with, as you said. How did he keep his clients?
It sometimes happened that after a house was built or purchased through Earl, that he developed a very good relationship with his clients. But it also happened that if anything, it's hard to describe.
Yeah.
Happened, if something was said, if something was done, he would turn on them and have nothing more to do with them. And I can say that freely because the family knows that I'm not saying anything that anybody doesn't know.
Sure.
So we have to be very discreet about Earl, and there are stories galore about him. So when we first got together, our editorial group, that was the first question we said to ourselves: how do we handle this? How we just finally decided, it took 2 or 3 sessions of discussion. If you say something about Earl now that happened 75 years ago, how do you know how it fits exactly like what happened back then?
Yeah.
So we decided then to not do anything. What we essentially say about Earl is what everybody does. You embellish stories as you tell them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's essentially gossip. So we decided just simply to say he was difficult and leave it go at that.
Well, now that's something I've been thinking about, right? So here's a guy, he was a local legend. I mean, obviously his houses have become a landmark in northwestern Michigan, let alone Charlevoix. How hard was it with an editorial group, a staff, to sift through the legends for the facts? I mean, was it hard? Was it difficult? Were there a lot of legends about Mr. Young? What was that process like?
It was the process of just sitting there and thinking, do we really want to say this? Because do we know? Do we really know? I came across a story that was told to me about when he was an insurance agent.
Right.
And something happened with one of his clients. And the culmination of that story hit me that it couldn't possibly have happened because Earl gave up the insurance side of his business in 1921. And the story that was related to me is something that happened in the 1940s. So there again, you have an instance where you have to be extremely careful and know what you're talking about. I did include maybe a couple of things that my dad told me. No, I didn't include it because I didn't really know how to say it. So what we want to do is we want to focus on what the man did,
Right.
not really what he was as a person. And I summed him up in the last chapter. Was he egocentric? No. Was he egotistical? Yes, but in the positive sense of the word, because nobody can do anything if you don't have a healthy sense of self. And if you look at Earl's signature, he was extremely self-confident in himself, and he had a definite interest in rounded form. Let me find it for you. Let me hold it up.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
This is Earl's signature.
Hold it up just a little more. Okay, I see. No. Go down a little and go to the right. Just bring it over a little more and hold it up just a little more. There you go. Okay, yes, very strident.
You look at that signature, that is not a man who is unsure of himself.
Sure, sure.
Another thing he did, and this is in the book, it has a page to itself, he collected boulders. And if he found a piece of civic land owned by a city that he thought looked a little bare, needed a little spiffing up, he would go get one of his boulders and he would haul it there and place it exactly like he wanted it to be without any permission from the city at all. And if somebody got into his face and reprimanded him for it, he would look him in the eye and say, "Move it." So the city ended up putting concrete bases under them. That was Earl.
Nice, very nice. So I have to ask, so what kind of research did you guys do? Was it just the files at the Historical Society? Was it oral histories? Did you go to national or statewide resources as well? What kind of research did you go into this book?
We have a big file on Earl, but it didn't go far enough. And we realized we needed to do more. And fellow Trevor, whom you met earlier when you were setting up, is a crackerjack at research. So he became the principal researcher, and Trevor can go into the newspapers and other stuff and find things in an instant.
Okay.
It's just uncanny. I call it supernatural. There's just something spooky about this because I'm not that adept on the internet. So he was able to find a lot. And we had what we thought was a chronology of the first 5 houses he did, and we found out that it was off on a couple of the houses. And that was Trevor's ability to go in and just piece the clues together. We knew that Earl's parents had divorced, we didn't know when, and this happened during one of our weekly meetings. So the other 4 of us are talking, he's tapping away, and within a few minutes he says 1905. I said, what about 1905? That's when they divorced, he said. So that's how quick we were able to do it with his ability. So finally, everything started to coalesce in the last decade. A lot of his things in his estate reached us. His own photographs, maps, drawings done by other people, letters, and all of what we needed all of a sudden started to come together. So when we started in 2019, we had it. And we just needed Trevor to do that much more little research. And that's how the book came to be. We couldn't have done it without all that.
You know, I'm for some reason brought to mind about Frank Lloyd Wright and, how how singular his houses were, but yet architecturally they weren't always sound. And for some reason I have this thought in my mind, how sound are those houses? Were they architecturally or were they more artistic like Frank Lloyd Wright? I mean, beautiful, but yet sometimes not always practical. And I'm just wondering about that in my mind.
The impracticality of the Earl Young house is he built a lot of them as summer rentals.
Okay.
So they sat vacant for maybe 9 months a year.
Right.
Earl and Irene didn't have much use for cooking, neither one. So even though she helped him in a lot of his designs, they didn't really put too much importance on the kitchen. So if you go into the book to Boulder Manor, and it's where I say, as late as 1974, when new owners came in, their kitchen was a walk space that on one side was a counter, 2 chairs, and a hot plate. So they had to convert the garage into a kitchen. Practically every one of them has had some internal redesign done to them, especially the kitchens. So yes, and another thing is Earl stood 5 feet 3 inches tall. Wow. He designed the houses from the angle that he beheld the world. And a lot of people, myself included, are uncomfortable in many of them because I'm 5'10", and anybody at me and taller. Well, to give you an example, The Panama House at Boulder Park has a detached garage. It's now an apartment.
Right.
Some friends of mine had an anniversary gift given to them of a week at that place. So they invited me to come down and spend some time. Tim, I lasted 20 minutes inside it. I had to get out because I live in a 10-room Victorian. So I was not used to this. It was the walls were literally coming in on me. So space-wise, height-wise, kitchen-wise, yes, there's some problem there. But a lot of people get these houses and fall madly in love with them.
Okay. And are they year-round houses now? I mean, you said they were a lot of them were built originally as summer cottages. Are they year-round houses now?
Some of them have been converted into year-round now, but majority of them still are summer homes.
So I'm going to ask a very stupid question, only because the way you describe it, I mean, it almost feels like, if you know the illusion, hobbit houses. I mean, is that how you would describe them? I mean, is it, kind of for a smaller folk, if you will?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly it.
That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
Tolkien houses, hobbit houses, gnome homes, troll homes.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, and really, I mean, I remember driving by them, and I've been to Charlevoix. I mean, they do feel like almost part of the landscape, and that was kind of his design, right? I mean, he was walking the ground. He wanted to know.
Mm-hmm. You hit the nail on the head right there. There is one thing with Frank Lloyd Wright that he would agreed with totally, and Frank Lloyd Wright said a house should be married to the ground on which it sits, and that is Earl. So you can see it when you go in. And I tell people, don't just walk by them casually and glance at them. Stand there and look, and they'll come to you. I was in my 40s before they made any impression on me, because that was my playground. I live on Park Avenue, so his Park Avenue houses were part of my growing up, and they didn't mean anything to me.
I mean, younger, you didn't think they were singular in any way? You just thought they were just normal houses next door, huh?
No, we'd have people come visit us in Charlevoix. We'd take them up there and see these cute little houses.
Yeah.
And one day I took a walk and I put on my walking shoes and I said to myself, it's about time you stopped and looked at these. And I did. And it was like divine revelation descending on a shaft of golden light. All of a sudden, they came alive to me. And I was seeing things that I never saw before, just because I took the time to look. And I went, holy cow.
And being a history,
what have I been missing all these years?
Well, and being a history person myself, I mean, now are all these considered Michigan landmarks or national landmarks now, all the houses?
We were just able to get recently historic district designation for the Park Avenue houses.
Oh, good.
But the Boulder Park houses are outside the city limits. So we're hoping that to work with the township to eventually get historic district designation for them also.
Fantastic. Okay. All right. Well, David, I got to ask, with all your knowledge about Charlevoix and Earl Young, is there another topic that's brewing in your mind right now, or the societies that you're thinking about writing about?
I would like to do a book on the bragging rights that I told you about. Yeah. I think I got material to do that. What makes Charlevoix so unique? And I've got to convince the board of directors that that's something to do. But you do a book of this size, and you don't really have an idea for anything else, because you got to decompress.
Sure.
I'm so involved in this that it takes a lot out of you.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden you get the itch again.
And let me ask, do you still feel like you have to change the title? Not bragging rights? You can't call it bragging rights?
Well, you don't want to do that with your public. But, you had on one of your questions here, how did we come up with the title?
Yeah, please.
The working title, as we were working on it, was The Life and Creations of Earl Young in Charlevoix, Michigan.
Yeah.
And that just sort of sat there flat as a pancake. So we needed something more, and I started rereading the book. I've got a message here. Hold on. Okay. So I started rereading, and I came to the last page of chapter 2, and there was a quote from the Charlevoix Courier in there about Boulder Park, 1937. And I'm reading along, and 5 sentences in that little paragraph all ended with the word boulders. And I thought, there it is. So that's how it ended up.
See, now I thought, and honestly, the reason why I didn't even ask that question, because I thought you had alluded to it when you said he was taking boulders and putting them on empty lots throughout the city. And I just thought, oh, well, that must be the reason why. But okay, very good. Well, thank you for
yeah.
Let
Maybe
me ask you,
what to see the
what's
trees.
that?
Being too close to the forest to see the trees.
So let me ask you this. What did it mean to you to be chosen as a Michigan Notable Book? How did that feel for you guys up in the Charlevoix Historical Society?
Well, I got to tell you, Tim, you called me on December 10 before you sent the official email on the 11th.
Yes.
And I was sitting in my chair at my computer, and the chair started to disappear under me. It was like I was levitating. I tell people it was the strangest sensation. It was like the chair was going down and I was going up.
Nice.
And what happened was we sent the books in for judging, the jurors, and then promptly forgot all about them. And I think it was in October, my boss, Denise, said, "What have you heard about the book for the Library of Michigan?" I said, well, they still got 2 months to go in the year. So I imagine they're going to be waiting until the end of the year, which is, of course, what you did.
Yep.
So then we just forgot about it again. And then you called, and it's one of the most fantastic phone calls I have ever received in my life.
Well, it was fun.
So
I remember that call vividly. It was fun to call you, definitely.
So thank you. That's, all I can. To be honored in such a way by your state, is just about as good as it gets.
Fantastic.
I can't think of any other higher honor that you could get in Michigan.
Well, thank you.
Honestly.
Well, and David, it's well deserved. You and your organization. I mean, you made a beautiful book. It was just highly regarded in the committee. And obviously, it's a very well-known topic throughout the state. And I'm just so glad to have you here today. Is there anything you'd like to add at the end?
Yes. One thing I forgot to say was Earl's popularity has grown to the fact that on a typical summer day on Park Avenue, you will have between 200 and 300 cars a day going by to look at those houses.
Fantastic. Well, hopefully we had a little more traffic, or maybe not hopefully, right? Maybe you don't want
that. It's certainly opening up Charlevoix to a lot of people who never knew about it before. And with the transformation of his first house into the, what do we call it, the thatch house, the big thatch house is rather overpowering. That has had a lot of press and internet coverage. So that is one reason a lot of people are coming without even knowing that the Earl Young houses are surrounding it.
Okay.
And they're getting 2 for the price of 1, really.
Fantastic. Well, David, thank you so much. Thank you for being
here. Thank you, Tim.
And thank you, everyone, today. We've been talking to David Miles, author of Boulders, Life of Earl Young, of the famous mushroom houses, if you will, up in Charlevoix. David, thank you so much, and thank you for being with us today, and have a wonderful day.
You too, Tim. Come up and see me sometime.
I will.